You know, when we talk about the UFC, we're usually talking about knockouts, submissions, and champions, right? But behind the Octagon, there's a whole other story. It's a story of a financial powerhouse that went from this kind of niche spectacle into a global, multi-billion-dollar phenomenon. So, how did they pull it off? How did they go from a controversial sideshow to a financial juggernaut? Well, let's break down the blueprint. First things first, just look at this number. According to their 2025 financials, the UFC pulled in a staggering $1.502 billion in total revenue. I mean, to put that into perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of some small countries. It's just a testament to a business model that they've perfected over decades. So, that's the big question, isn't it? How? How does an organization that's literally built on fighting generate that kind of cash? Well, the answer isn't just about selling tickets to events. It's a story that starts with a really, really high-stakes gamble. See, the UFC's financial journey, it didn't kick off with those cozy, guaranteed broadcast deals you see with the NFL or the NBA. Nope. It started with a massive bet on a super risky model, pay-per-view. And honestly, it was their only path forward. Back in the early days, you have to remember major networks wouldn't even touch mixed martial arts. Sponsors were terrified of it. This quote really hits the nail on the head. With every other door slammed shut, pay-per-view wasn't some brilliant strategic choice, it was an act of survival. And this right here perfectly illustrates the difference in risk. A broadcast deal, that gives you a predictable, guaranteed paycheck over years. It's stable. Pay-per-view, on the other hand, man, that is a high-wire act. Your entire revenue depends on how many people on one single night decide to open their wallets and buy the event. It's incredibly unpredictable. So to make this whole high-risk model even work, you've got to incentivize your biggest stars, right? And that's where pay-per-view points come in. It's basically a bonus system where the top fighters get a small slice of the pie for every single PPV unit sold over a certain target. It meant that if a fight was a massive blockbuster hit, the fighters shared in that massive success. So how did this actually work for a fighter? Let's take a look at a real-world example from 2013 with Eddie Alvarez. On top of his guaranteed pay to show up and fight, he'd get an extra dollar for every single buy between $200,000 and $400,000. Then that bonus would jump to $2 and then $250 for anything over 600,000 buys. On a huge night, these little amounts could add up to millions, turning a standard fight purse into a life-changing payday. Okay, so relying on pay-per-view alone wasn't a sustainable way to become a global brand. The UFC had to de-risk its business and find a way to break into the mainstream. This next chapter, it's all about the strategic pivots that made that happen. The first huge pivot was, you guessed it, another gamble. In the early 2000s, the UFC paid Spike TV $10 million out of their own pocket just to produce and air the first season of a reality show called The Ultimate Fighter. Get this, they didn't even get a cut of the ad revenue. But boy, did it pay off. The finale drew 3 million viewers, and the very next PPV event, headlined by the show's coaches, doubled the company's previous sales record. It was the breakthrough they desperately needed. This whole journey, from the fringes to the center of the sports world, it just shows the company's true genius. After the Spike TV era put them on basic cable, they landed a 7-year, $700 million deal with Fox in 2011. That gave them mainstream legitimacy. But the real game changer was the 2019 deal with ESPN+. For a guaranteed $1.5 billion, the UFC shifted the massive financial risk of pay-per-view onto a media giant, securing its future for good. This was them realizing they weren't just a sport, they were a media property, built perfectly for modern entertainment. And that brings us to today, the modern era, where the UFC is no longer a high-risk gamble. Oh no. It is a diversified, powerful, and incredibly profitable part of a much larger sports and entertainment empire. The UFC now operates under TKO Group Holdings, which is a publicly traded company that also owns its longtime entertainment rival, the WWE. Yeah, you heard that right. This move consolidated two of the biggest brands in combat sports and sports entertainment all under one roof. So where did that $1.5 billion come from? Well, the vast majority, over 60%, now comes from guaranteed media rights and content deals. Partnerships and marketing are next, then live events. You see what happened? This is the complete opposite of that old, risky PPV model. It's a stable, modern media company. And that stability and growth is crystal clear when you look at the year-over-year numbers. Media rights and live events saw these healthy, predictable increases. But check out the jump in partnerships and marketing, from $251 million to over $314 million in just 1 year. That shows you the incredible growing power of the UFC brand to attract major corporate sponsors. All right, now for a fascinating little plot twist inside of TKO. While the UFC is an absolute financial titan, in 2025, it was actually surpassed in total revenue by its corporate sibling. The WWE brought in over $1.7 billion, largely thanks to a massive surge from its own new media rights deals. But listen, revenue is only half the story. The really crucial point here is profitability. While WWE is now the revenue leader, the UFC remains the margin leader, with an incredible 57% adjusted EBITDA margin, which is basically just a measure of a company's operating profitability. The UFC is one of the most efficient and profitable sports properties on the entire planet. Its lean operations are second to none. So, with two giants under one roof and a business model that's just firing on all cylinders, what does the future hold for the UFC and really the entire combat sports industry? Having pretty much conquered its home market and solidified its financial base, the UFC's next chapter is all about global expansion. The question now is, just how big can it get? And the projections are incredibly bullish. The global UFC market, valued at $1.5 billion today, is projected to more than double, reaching $3.5 billion by 2032. We're talking about a 12% compound annual growth rate, driven by digital streaming, international expansion, and new global partnerships. Yeah, the ceiling is still a long, long way off. Which brings us right back to where we started. The UFC was born out of the pay-per-view model, but it built its empire by moving away from it into the stable world of media rights. And as the entire sports landscape shifts to streaming, it really makes you wonder, was the UFC's journey a one-way street? Or could the rest of the sports world someday be forced to follow in its original, high-risk footsteps?